The basement that terrified a city. What if your neighbor was hiding a dungeon beneath their home? In the 1940s in Tulsa, Oklahoma, a woman named Carol Ann Smith lived in a quiet neighborhood. But what unfolded beneath her house was anything but quiet. Police stumbled upon a basement so disturbing, the press would nickname it the Hex House. Victims weren't chained by force, they were bound by something even darker. Psychological control, fear, and something that felt supernatural. This wasn't just abuse, it was a spell. Even today, whispers of that basement still haunt those who live nearby. It wasn't just a crime scene, it was a portal to psychological torment. And what began in that house still echoes in the nightmares of Tulsa. A quiet woman with a dark secret. Carol Ann Smith looked like an ordinary woman, but nothing about her life was ordinary. She lived in a modest home at 10 East 21st Street, kept to herself, and rarely spoke to neighbors. But behind her polite smiles and calm demeanor hid a manipulative force few could resist. She wasn't just clever, she was calculating. Her charm lured people in, but once inside her home, they often disappeared from public view. Locals would later say the house gave off a strange energy, like it didn't want to be approached. It was the kind of house that seemed to breathe at night. Even the trees near it grew strangely twisted, as if recoiling from what lay beneath. There was no sign of chaos, only an eerie, unnatural order. The disappearance that sparked it all. It began with a missing person, but led to so much more. A concerned friend contacted police saying she hadn't seen a young woman who lived with Smith for months. Officers arrived expecting a routine wellness check, but what they found was beyond comprehension. 2 women were discovered in the basement, alive but barely. They weren't tied up, they weren't physically restrained, and yet they refused to leave. One of them wept silently when officers tried to lift her. The other kept repeating, "She'll punish us." The air down there felt heavier than the dark itself. The Hex House is exposed. When police descended into the basement, they found something out of a horror novel. There were no beds, no light, no personal belongings, just cold concrete, a single bucket, and blankets on the floor. The 2 women, Virginia Evans and Willetta Horner, had been living in that darkness for nearly 2 years. Voluntarily, that's what made the story even more chilling. They believed Carol Ann Smith had power over them, not through threats, but through fear, hypnosis, and spiritual terror. One officer claimed he felt dizzy just standing inside the room. Another said it felt like evil was thick in the air. It was less like a room and more like a tomb. Victims under a spell. Evans and Horner weren't hostages in the traditional sense. They were brainwashed. Smith convinced them they were under God's punishment and could only be saved by obeying her every command. They worked during the day, handing over every cent of their paychecks to Smith. At night, they returned to their dark cell beneath her house. They weren't allowed to speak without permission. They ate what she allowed. They believed if they disobeyed, they would die. Their minds were shattered, but their faith in Smith remained unbreakable. They whispered prayers not to God, but to her. They weren't trapped by walls, they were trapped by devotion, Smith's web of control. Carol Ann Smith was a master manipulator with a deep understanding of fear and control. She used religious guilt, spiritual rituals, and financial dependence to dominate her victims. She even faked documents showing debts and forged letters to support her lies. Smith's hold was absolute, built on trust twisted into terror. She told her victims they were cursed and that she alone held the key to salvation. This wasn't just criminal, it was cult-like. She used scripture as a weapon and twisted love into obedience. They didn't need chains. They were already enslaved in spirit. She made herself their god, their jailer, and their only hope. The money behind the madness. Follow the money, and you follow the crime. Smith had received over $17,000 from one victim alone, a massive sum in 1940s money. She bought furs, jewelry, expensive meals, and even property, all off the backs of her mind-controlled slaves. She was living like a queen, while they slept on concrete. Investigators found falsified insurance claims and forged checks. Smith didn't just manipulate minds, she manipulated banks, businesses, and records. Her greed was as bottomless as her cruelty. Even her pets lived better than the women below. Every dollar they earned funded her empire of fear. The trial that shook Tulsa. When the case went public, it electrified the nation. Reporters dubbed it the Hex House case, claiming Smith had hypnotic or even occult powers. People flooded courtrooms just to catch a glimpse of the woman who ruled with fear. Smith pled not guilty, but her house told a different story. Photographs of the basement shocked jurors. Her victims testified, breaking down in tears, still unsure if they were free. The courtroom smelled of perfume and sweat. Fear hung over every testimony. Smith, calm and silent, smiled as if the trial was a formality. To her followers, she was still untouchable, even behind bars. The house becomes a legend. After Smith's arrest, the house gained a life of its own. It sat vacant for years, avoided like the plague. Neighbors said lights flickered, doors slammed, and shadows moved in the windows. Some claimed they heard whispers beneath the floorboards. The basement, even when empty, felt occupied. Eventually, the house was demolished. But even that didn't kill the legend. The ground beneath it still draws ghost hunters and thrill seekers. Dogs refuse to walk across the property line. Even Google Street View once glitched while scanning the spot. And every Halloween, the wind howls just a bit louder there. Hex House returns as Halloween attraction. Decades later, Tulsa embraced its darkest chapter in an unexpected way. A Halloween haunted house called the Hex House was opened, inspired by the real case. Visitors descend into dark corridors, reenacting the chilling experience of Smith's victims. But for some, it's more than fun. It's a reminder of real horror. Actors report feeling uneasy in costume. Equipment malfunctions constantly in the basement replica. Some say Carol Ann Smith's spirit still haunts the legend. A few guests claimed they saw a shadowy woman standing at the exit. One visitor fainted after hearing a voice whisper her name. The horror lives on, not in fiction, but in echoes. How could this happen? The most terrifying part of the Hex House story isn't the basement, it's how long it lasted. Neighbors saw nothing. Authorities were clueless. And the victims? They didn't even know they were victims. It's proof that evil doesn't always wear a mask. Sometimes it smiles. Smith wasn't a monster in appearance. She was calm, educated, methodical. Which begs the question, how many more like her walk among us? Tulsa learned too late. The rest of us? We'd better not. When evil hides behind charm, it becomes nearly invisible. And by the time it's revealed, the damage is already done. What hides behind politeness can sometimes be unspeakable. Darkness can hide anywhere. Carol Ann Smith turned her home into a nightmare, without bars, chains, or blood. She used control, belief, and isolation to bend minds and steal lives. The Hex House isn't just a story, it's a warning. Not all horror comes from ghosts. Sometimes it lives right next door. So before you dismiss the quiet woman down the street, ask yourself, what's in her basement? Because sometimes the scariest monsters live in daylight, and they smile when they answer the door. And sometimes the basement door never really closes. Thank you for watching. If the story of Carol Ann Smith's haunted basement sent chills down your spine, tap the like button. And if you dare to uncover more real-life horrors, don't forget to subscribe for our next descent into darkness.